Hey Lizzy,
Hi.
how you doing?
Uh,
So over the last few years, you know, you and I, we've made a few offshore passages.
yeah.
The longest one was from Bermuda to Virgin Islands last year, to about 1,000 nautical miles. But recently we made a couple of passages. One from on the 30-foot boat, the Sea Sprite 30. We sailed from Beaufort, North Carolina, to Wrightsville Beach, Masonboro Inlet. And then we took the ICW from Wrightsville Beach down to Bald Head Island, basically Cape Fear Inlet, to stage for a little bit longer passage from Bald Head to Charleston. And we completed that a couple days ago, and that was an interesting passage. And we talked about it earlier in the video. But I thought it'd be really cool to get your perspective, and I think useful for our viewers to get your perspective about the passage. So looking back on it, what were your lessons learned from this last passage? What were the things that you would like, that we learned, or that you learned about yourself, about the boat, things that we would do or you would do differently, modifications you'd want to make to the boat,
Right.
you know?
I guess the main thing I learned, sailing downwind is not my favorite, and it never has been. And
What's your big concern sailing downwind? What's hard about sailing dead downwind?
worrying about jibe.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's common, right? Nobody wants an accidental jibe. And I tend to feel more overwhelmed with downwind, or less, what did I keep saying? Less in control. I felt like the wind and the swells had more control than I did. I don't like that feeling. But the last passage, what I felt like I learned was simply I need to continue helming as much as I can downwind. I felt like this year seems though this trip has been mostly helming downwind.
Right, the passage from Manio and the Pamlico to Hatteras was all downwind. The passage from Beaufort to Wrightsville Beach was almost all downwind.
Last year you mentioned the trip from Bermuda to the Virgin Islands, and I laughed at the end. It's like I learned about squalls.
Right.
At the beginning of it, I was a little concerned. By the end, I was like, another squall. I guess this year it's all about learning about downwind. And what I felt like this very last passage was I had done enough and felt like I had practiced, if you want to put it that way, that I would have been all right, except for the sea state. It was pretty rough. And the swells were pretty, impressive. And, sea was pretty high, and I had a hard time. I think I would have been okay, except for when I'm going down and up, and then all of a sudden I'm turning sideways. And I hate to say I'm not strong enough, because I am strong enough, but I need to work on that. I need to continue to work on that, and probably work out a little bit and increase my shoulder strength. Besides that, the boat, we've talked about putting a third reef in the main.
Yeah, a third reef in the main, because at one point
probably,
we had, when we left, we put two reefs in the main. We never put up the whole main. We had a double reef main, and at some point, even the double reef main was overpowered by the conditions.
I felt like we planned. I mean, we had the reefs in, we reefed the head sail, and we did what we were supposed to do, but having a little bit more of an option on that mainsail probably would have been good.
What else would have been nice on the boat?
Autopilot a little bit.
So we have a wheel pilot that struggles with tough conditions. Unless the sails are perfectly balanced and the sea state is relatively calm, it can get
This trip,
it can get overpowered.
It wasn't until we took all of the canvas down that the mainsail was able to handle it. Is
Or
that right?
that the autopilot. Yeah, we
That
at
the
some point.
autopilot, once
Right.
we took all the canvas down, then the autopilot was able to.
Yeah, we were
handle it.
basically sailing under bare poles. The wind was just pushing the boat along, and since
Which
there
I
was
hate to say it, but that was when I was the most helpful, is I could at least take a watch at that point long term,
yeah.
and felt a little bit more.
But at that
helpful to
point,
give
there
you a
wasn't.
rest.
At that point, there wasn't enough pressure on the rudder or on the boat to overwhelm the autopilot, so
Right.
it easily steered the boat the way we
So
wanted it
yeah,
to.
maybe.
What else would you have liked to have? Was it chilly out there in the cockpit?
Oh my God. What was it? When we got here, I was like, okay, what did the lobster men on that TV show wear?
Yeah.
It's got to be something better.
Deadliest catch.
Yeah, there you go. Whatever they wear, that's what I want. Yeah, and I even bought some special Under Armour stuff, which I ended up switching back to my old standby. At the beginning, my body was overwhelmingly cold.
And so, if money was no object, what would you add to the boat to remedy that?
Oh, a full enclosure. Oh,
So,
yeah.
You know what? A Dodger and a Bimini's not enough for you with a little
Well,
connector?
see, either that or I want a new suit of some sort.
Like a dry suit, a survival suit,
No,
a
whatever.
Gumby suit.
Something. I just am so cold natured that I would have been fine if it had been 10 degrees warmer. I think I would have been okay weather-wise, but it was cold.
So in all of that that trip, were you ever very concerned?
I was never scared.
Right.
No, luckily.
You were a little bit worried at one point when we had some targets on the AIS.
Well, yeah. Well, there was a big yellow buoy apparently out there somewhere that I never saw. And then there, at one point, there was also 2 boats that were anchored your entire watch, and so you're heading down. Of course, as they always say, shit happens when the next person comes up.
No. Let's make this clear. When I'm on watch, nothing ever happens. The boat sails perfectly. There's no targets. There's no contacts.
Yes.
There's no buoys. You come up. I give you the hand over. I go down 20 minutes. I'm just about asleep. And then what happens? Either a squall or a contact or
This time,
a
you
malfunction.
headed down, and I was like, well, what about these 2 boats? Oh, they've been there for hours. They've been anchored. And I'm like, okay. So I'm looking, and all of a sudden one starts moving. And I'm like, it's not anchored. And punch on there. Well, it's moving. And it was what was it?
Tug.
Yeah, but how long was it? 80?
Well, it was a tug, had a barge or something behind it.
Yeah. And I was like, it's moving. And you're like, of course it's moving. Anyway, and we got in touch with them, and it was, well, one of them we spoke to, and then the other one just continues to come straight for me. And so then we decided to go in between them. That was okay. Then there was the big buoy thing. You're like, well, just don't hit the yellow buoy. And it was like, okay. So then I get within, well,
Like a
I
mile.
first said something at 0.75 miles or whatever. It's like, I don't have a visual on this buoy yet. And I was like, chart-wise, I'm okay, but I don't have a visual, which didn't make me feel comfortable.
You never found it, did you? Never saw it?
No, and we
was
came
probably
within 0.10.
Yeah, 1/10 of a mile of it.
Yeah, within 1/10 of a mile of it, and I never saw that yellow buoy.
Could be scary.
Yeah,
but...
because you hear people hitting things like that.
And then the last question for you is, what do you think of the weather forecasters? Do you trust weather forecasters?
No. No.
What are we gonna do? What can we do about it? There's not much we can do.
No, I just, you are always, he's on every hour and a half checking the weather for weeks in advance. And so, and on what? 3 different apps at least. And so we felt like we had a pretty good indication of what it was going to be. We sat down and looked at it together and discussed, okay, it's going to be challenging at this point, but it's going to get better. Okay, we can do this. And That
It's not how it turned out, right?
Not at all.
Instead of falling off, the
No
wind just picked
way.
up, and
It just continued to pick up. And again, we at one point, we admitted we kind of missed Quetzal a little bit.
that'd be nice to have a 60,000-pound boat.
Well, we
with
kind
roller
of laughed
furling,
at it. That
would've
situation, we
would've
kind of
just,
missed Quetzal because she could have just sliced
She
through
wouldn't.
it.
It wouldn't have bothered her.
She would
a
have
bit.
just sliced right through it.
But old Sea Sprite did fine.
She did great. She
Yeah.
took care of us as always. But no, I'm not a big fan of any of the weather that we've.
The forecasts just don't seem to come through as they should. And this, we're not talking about a long range forecast. We're talking about a forecast. Literally, we looked at it right before we left. So a 24-hour forecast that they can't get right.
Yeah, and that's disappointing.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
But I guess you have to accept that that's part of sailing.
Well,
you have to be ready to deal with it.
Well, we've talked about it since then, that we've got to roll. That's something I think we both felt like we walked away and learned from it too, that okay, this is the way they say it's going to be. What if it's not?
Right.
Because without the autopilot, etc., do we want to do a 2-day passage under those circumstances?
Probably not.
Probably
but
not.
we might end up doing it. Just so that's how it happens.
But it depends upon. We need to consider it. If the weather looks questionable, we may not want to do that for 2 days.
Right. All right. Well, thank you very much for your thoughts. I hope you're ready to go offshore again in the near future.
Yeah, I'll still go.
Next leg is probably about 180 miles from Charleston to St. Augustine, unless we stop somewhere short.
Oh, I thought we weren't going to do that.
Well, it all depends on the weather. Love you.
Love you too.